Our fourth and final must draft tight end. I mean, you don't want to be drafting 4 tight ends on Underdog, but the 4 best far and away current values. Here's number 4, Luke Musgrave. He's going exceptionally cheap. So he's a great tight end 3 if you took one of our earlier tight ends or 2 of our earlier tight ends. And why is he a great target? Well, one of the most potent cheat codes in fantasy is targeting sophomore tight ends. Tight ends tend to make a colossal jump from year 1 to year 2, where in year 2, they're just about in peak performance already. And so I love me some sophomore tight ends. And Musgrave flashed last season through the first 8 games of the year before suffering an abdominal injury, which put him on IR. In those 8 games, he was tight end 14 by yards per game, had a 78% snap share. That was top 10. But then he goes down. Tucker Kraft comes in. He's tight end 13 by yards per game with a 94% snap share. We're at top 2 at the position. And so clearly Green Bay's making good use out of their tight ends. It seems to be a valuable role in the offense. What?
Why are you shaking your head? You're welcome.
Who are the must-draft tight ends? Who are the best value tight ends in Underdog best ball drafts right now? Let's get into it. Number 1, first tight end on the list. This is an easy one. Mark Andrews, must draft. He, last year, across his 9 healthy games, averaged 12.2 half-point PPR fantasy points per game, would have led the position. The year before that, he averaged 12.7 fantasy points per game across the 9 games. Both he and Lamar Jackson played in full. That ranked behind only Travis Kelce. The year before that, stayed healthy all year, finished as the overall tight end 1 in fantasy, 14.6 fantasy points per game. So you have a guy who is healthy, finished tight end 1, tight end 2, tight end 1. He's fully healthy right now. So why is he priced as just the tight end 5 on Underdog? I have no idea. I might like him more than just about every single one of these names, and yet he's the tight end 5. So clearly tremendous value, must draft tight end. Our next must draft tight end, and this one could be met with some groans. It might be a little trickier to argue, or at least hear, but I feel good about it. And that's Kyle Pitts. I think this is finally the year where he lives up to his immense league-wrecking potential that maybe no other tight end in fantasy has. Kyle Pitts is currently the tight end 6 by ADP. This was a player, according to Bill Belichick, was somewhere between a Julio Jones and a Tony Gonzalez. According to me, this was a player with the potential to be Calvin Johnson with a tight end designation for fantasy. Immense league-wrecking potential. This is the year we finally see Kyle Pitts live up to it. So what went wrong for Kyle Pitts? It wasn't just that the Falcons were World War II era levels of run heavy. It wasn't just that their quarterback play was atrocious. It was really both of those points working in tandem. Over the last 2 seasons, the Falcons averaged just 20 catchable targets per game. The Vikings, new quarterback Kirk Cousins comes over from the Vikings, averaged 30.1 over this span. That's a whopping 50% increase. So it's basically as if you could go, okay, Kyle Pitts had 90 targets last year, multiply by 1.5x, and now you're left with 135. The Vikings passing offense was 50% more hospitable to fantasy production than the Falcons. This is fully baked into Drake London's price. He's a top 15 pick over on Underdog. For some reason, not baked in at all for Kyle Pitts, who was a 6th round pick last year, is a 6th round pick this year. So obviously replacing Desmond Mitter with Kirk Cousins, big upgrade. Replacing Arthur Smith with anyone, big fantasy upgrade. Looking back over the past few seasons, you see glimpses of what Kyle Pitts can be. Over the last 2 years, he ranks behind only Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews in XFP, that's expected fantasy points per route run. What does that mean? It means on a per route basis, he was seeing the third best volume of any tight end in fantasy. We know targets are earned. If you're earning targets as a receiver, it means you're getting open. It means you're talented. It means you're skilled. And he was getting open. He was commanding targets and high value targets at one of the top 3 highest rates at the position on a per route basis. And he was doing all this despite being seriously hobbled by an MCL and PCL injury that was far more serious than the team initially let on, far more complex than initially reported, something that bothered him all of last year, but by all reports, including his own testimony, he's fully healthy now this year. And this is the year to invest. This is the year where he's going to break leagues. If you have to see it before you buy into it, you're going to be too late. Pitts, in my opinion, is a sure thing. It's only a matter of when and not if. And given all the positive changes with no adjustment in his ADP, this is the year you want to make that calculated bet. Another must draft tight end at current ADP is Jake Ferguson, round 8, tight end 9. Really, this could be as simple as we want to make it. We could just say Dallas is one of the best offenses in fantasy. It's one of the best or safest for a tight end. Dallas's tight end 1 is ranked top 10 at the position in total targets in 8 of the last 9 seasons. Dallas could very well lead the league in pass attempts this year. They did from week 9 on last season. And the Cowboys really don't have anyone to throw the ball to beyond CeeDee Lamb and Ferguson. And so maybe it's just that simple. If we want to go a little more in depth with it, we could say, well, he's due for a massive positive touchdown regression. He led all tight ends in red zone targets last year, ranked second in end zone targets, but finished in a 5-way tie for 7th at the position in total touchdowns with just 5. We could say he was at his best at the tail end of last season. Not at all surprising for an inexperienced sophomore tight end who still has plenty of room for growth. That's what he said this offseason. That's what a number of his teammates and coaches have said, that he's only scratching the surface of his true potential. But yeah, let's look at over his last 7 games. That includes a massive 32.3 point spike week performance in the postseason, which, remember, in Underdog's tournament style format, we want those immense spike weeks, or at least the potential thereof. So last 7 games, Ferguson averaged 7.6 targets per game, a low of just 6 targets, 77% route share, and most importantly, 12.5 fantasy points per game, which would have led the position if over the full season. So why is he going 5 rounds behind Sam Laporta? Why is he going 50 picks behind Dalton Kincaid? I have no idea. Another young, exciting tight end with plenty of potential and upside, and really one of the safest picks around. So tight end 9, round 8, love me some Jake Ferguson. Our 4th and final must draft tight end. I mean, you don't want to be drafting 4 tight ends on Underdog, but the 4 best far and away current values. Here's number 4, Luke Musgrave. He's going exceptionally cheap. So he's a great tight end 3 if you took one of our earlier tight ends or 2 of our earlier tight ends. And why is he a great target? Well, one of the most potent cheat codes in fantasy is targeting sophomore tight ends. Tight ends tend to make a colossal jump from year 1 to year 2, where in year 2, they're just about in peak performance already. And so I love me some sophomore tight ends. And Musgrave flashed last season through the first 8 games of the year before suffering an abdominal injury, which put him on IR. In those 8 games, he was tight end 14 by yards per game, had a 78% snap share. That was top 10. But then he goes down. Tucker Kraft comes in. He's tight end 13 by yards per game with a 94% snap share, right, top 2 at the position. And so clearly Green Bay's making good use out of their tight ends. It seems to be a valuable role in the offense. And, Kraft was a fellow rookie. Again, we know tight ends make a big leap in their sophomore seasons. The big question I think everyone is asking themselves is, well, which tight end do you draft? Because, Musgrave was the starter in week 1. He was ahead of Kraft. He was drafted a full round earlier than Kraft, but then, Kraft was really impressive to round out the season. And the answer to this question is really easy. Kraft right now is dealing with a very serious pectoral injury, which could cause him to miss all of training camp. According to Pro Football Talk, Kraft's pectoral popped right off the bone. Yikes. Yeah, that's not good. And he's just at a massive disadvantage for sitting out all of training camp. So Luke Musgrave feels really safe to me, really good upside on an offense you want to stay invested in. So that's our fourth and final must draft tight end. Next tight end on our list is George Kittle. He's going right after Andrews and Pitts, but he's not quite in the same tier in terms of being a value. Speaking from a fantasy perspective, from a real life NFL perspective, George Kittle might be the most underrated player in football. He might be the most valuable non-quarterback in football. The guy is an absolute freak of nature. I love him. He's my favorite player. He's led all tight ends in yards per route run in 5 of his last 6 seasons. In 2019, he set the PFF era record. And keep in mind, he's done this with numerous injuries all throughout his entire career. He's played with a torn labrum since he entered the league. He's played through he separated his right shoulder in 2018, didn't miss any time. He's played with broken bones in his ankle, knee patella sprains, hamstring sprains, MCL sprains, calf strains, groin strains, a sports hernia, and he plays through it all, and he plays at the highest possible level. That's my take from an NFL perspective. The guy is superhuman, and I love him, and like, how could you not root your asses off for a George Kittle? From a fantasy perspective, he's at a disadvantage to, a peak Travis Kelce or a Mark Andrews, just because he doesn't run as many routes. He leads in yards per route run, but he spends more time blocking on a run heavy offense. But still, he's one of the most dependable fantasy tight ends in the game with a massive ceiling. He's exceeded 15 half-point PPR points in 14 games over the last 3 seasons. Only Mark Andrews and Travis Kelce have more than 8. He has massive upside if Brandon Ayuk or Deebo Samuel were to suffer an injury or get traded. Over the last 2 seasons, he averages 17.1 half-point PPR fantasy points per game when either Ayuk or Deebo Samuel sit out. That's wide receiver 1 numbers. That's nearly 6 points more on average than Travis Kelce last year. And he still feels as safe as they come. The guy plays through everything, and he just led the position in receiving yards last year. The next tight end on our list is Evan Engram, tight end 8 by ADP, round 7. So again, clearly you want to be targeting this range. I probably like Engram the least of the names we mentioned, but I still have him as a value. The argument's easy. Not only did he lead all tight ends in targets and receptions last year, but he ranked 4th among all players in receptions last season. Yes, he benefited from the absence of Christian Kirk, but even with Kirk in the lineup from weeks 1 through 12, he ranks 7th by fantasy points per game. And so keep in mind, he's the tight end 8 by ADP. And then without Kirk, he was just 0.1 fantasy points per game off of the position high. Keep in mind, he ran a little bad in the touchdown department. 114 catches, only 4 touchdowns. But now remember that Zay Jones is gone. Ridley, who led all players at all positions in end zone targets last year, is gone. So should see more touchdown upside for Evan Engram. I don't think Gabe Davis is good. I think Brian Thomas Jr. could be very good, but as it stands right now, he's very raw as a rookie. Doug Peterson tight ends have always smashed for fantasy. I think this is easy. I think he's a tremendous value, very safe, great pick at current ADP. On Underdog, you always want to be drafting 3 tight ends. Your advance rate is much higher if you're drafting 3 tight ends. So of course, we have to give you some cheaper options. And to me, Tyler Conklin really stands out. Round 15, tight end 21 by ADP. The guy is ranked 2nd on the Jets in receiving yards in each of the last 2 years. He joins only Travis Kelce, George Kittle, and Dalton Schultz as the only tight ends to see at least 85 targets the last 3 seasons. Over that span, never finishing worse than as the tight end 17 in fantasy points. And again, right now, tight end 21 by ADP. And so I think he's a lock to beat this. I think he's a lock to finish no worse than, what did I say? Tight end 17, right? But I think he has a lot more upside beyond that as well. Why? Because he's going from Zach Wilson, the worst quarterback in football, to Aaron Rodgers, who won MVP in each of his last 2 healthy seasons. So I see easy low end tight end 1 potential, and he's a mortal lock to beat his current ADP. The last tight end we're going to be talking about is Jonnu Smith, another very cheap option. The vibes on Smith from head coach Mike McDaniel have been great. Just because Durham Smythe didn't do anything last year doesn't mean Jonnu Smith can't do something this year. And let's not forget, Smythe ranked 10th among all tight ends in snap share last year. He was on the field. The guy just isn't very good. And Jonnu Smith is the tight end 25 by ADP. He finished last year as the tight end 17, despite being the tight end 2 on his own team, despite playing on one of the most run-heavy offenses in football with some of the worst quarterback play in football. And now he goes to one of the best offenses in football. Again, this one's easy. So there you have it, folks. 4 must-draft tight ends, 4 exceptional value tight ends. These are the players I'm targeting on Underdog.